Wilson had hoped. Nevertheless, he felt that the most important outcome of the treaty was that it established the League of Nations. To achieve that goal, he had been forced to compromise on some of his 14 points, but he believed his compromises had paid off when the conference participants unanimously agreed on the Covenant of the League of Nations. The covenant reflected Wilson's idea about security, the arbitration of international disputes, the reductions of armaments, and open diplomacy. The covenant also established a council of which Wilson hoped the United States would be permanent members. So even though all of his viewpoints of the 14-point plan that he put together weren't being represented exactly how he wanted them, all of the main points that he had behind it were included, which was what he felt was important. And obviously the League of Nations being what he valued as the most important. But again, as we already talked about and took a look, we found out that the United States never even becomes a part of it. It continues and said the covenant also established a council of which Wilson hoped the United States would be a permanent member. The signatories pledged to seek peaceful resolutions to disputes and to assist each other in the case of aggression, an idea referred to as a collective security. And again, what they mean here by signatories were all of the people that signed the treaty and agreed to the policies within it. And the idea of collective security is the idea that if somebody's coming against one of your friends and you stand up for them, even though it's not your issue, you still have their back in it. And that's what the countries were looking for. Most importantly, Wilson believed the League would dramatically reduce the likelihood of another Great War, which again, that idea of peace. Wilson's faith in the power of the new League of Nations was total. He believed the League would serve as a safety valve that would examine and adjust any disputed terms of the treaty settlements. If the new borders agreed on at Versailles were not perfect, the League would adjust them. And with the new borders, they're talking about the territories that were being returned to the people and the nations that they had been taken from. It says if the peace terms had flaws, the League would correct them. So pretty much all power was going into the hand of the League of Nations. Our next section is what did other members of the Big Four think about the League? And that's paragraph 41, Lloyd George, who had recently reelected under the slogan. His quote 42, the British people regard with absolute horror. 43, the French were pessimistic about the possibility. 44, the quote that says, I like the League, but I do not believe in it. Paragraph 45, Orlando was supportive of the idea. And the quote below that, paragraph 46, which is, I must have a solution. So again, you're writing a 25-word summary to the question, what did the other members of the Big Four think about the League? It says, Lloyd George, who had been recently reelected under the slogan, Make Germany Pay, knew that the British public supported the idea of the League. He knew that returning to Britain without a League of Nations would be disastrous politically. He's quoted as of saying, they, the British people, regard with absolute horror the continuance of a state of affairs which might again degenerate into such a tragedy. So pretty much he's referring to the fact that the British people were terrified of another war continuing. It goes on, and from the French perspective, it says the French were pessimistic about the possibility of international cooperation that could prevent the outbreak of war, although they were generally willing to try. Pessimistic meaning they were looking on the negative side of it, that they didn't necessarily think that peace was a possibility. But they wanted to try what it would, whatever was necessary to try to ensure it. It says, ambivalent as he might have been, Clemenceau refused to allow anyone to say that France had impeded the League's creation. So he is quoted as saying, I like the League, but I do not believe in it. Finally, you have Orlando, who is supportive of the idea of the League and of Wilson's ideas in general, as long as they coincided with what he thought Italy deserved. He was suspicious of the other members of the Big Four, however, and he resented his less powerful position. He was also aware that if the demands of the Italian public were not met, he might lose his position. So he was looking out for the people as well as his own political career. He's quoted as saying, I must have a solution. Otherwise, I will have a crisis in Parliament or in the streets of Italy, which is referring to the fact if he doesn't go back with a solution that the people agree with, that he's going to have to deal with an uproar in his own country because they're feeling that their needs were not met in that.